Hello and welcome to Meet Our Makers, an artist interview podcast produced in association with Beats Per Minute. I'm your host, Jeremy J. Facette. On this episode, we get to meet actress and writer Illeana Douglas. Illeana Douglas is probably best known as an actor. She has been in films as widely varied as Cape Fear, To Die For, all the way to Ghost World. She is also an accomplished writer. She published a memoir a few years ago called I Blame Dennis Hopper, and now she has her second book just released called Connecticut in the Movies. In this chat, Illeana and I bond a bit over the fact that we are both from Connecticut, we are both raised in Connecticut, and we are really excited to really delve into what Connecticut's reputation has been in the movies, how it's altered, transformed, morphed over the years to reflect both cultural truths and also some misconceptions. We talk about what it looks like nowadays in the movies and where she kind of hopes it goes from here. It was a great chat and a really great opportunity to really get into the cinematic history of my state and of her state. And I really suggest you go find a copy of the book. Now, as of the date of this recording, the SAG strike was still going on, and actors were pretty much not able to discuss their film work very much, especially anything new. And Illeana lays out those sort of ground rules for us early on. I decided not to remove that piece, even though as of today, November 11th, the SAG strike is over, which is great news for Hollywood and for movie fans and the industry in general. But be that as it may, we had plenty to talk about with just the book, so much to discuss, including things like why are people always drinking in Connecticut movies, and how did Mystic Pizza become sort of an emblematic film of our state, and much more. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy. This is me meeting Illeana Douglas.
Hi there.
Hi.
Oh, look at those guitars. Now, do you play or are they?
No, I do. I mean, I'm not like a pro, but yeah, I do. And I have a problem with buying too many.
Oh, same with my brother. My brother plays a lot of guitar, so that's
Yeah.
what I was asking. And a really good friend of mine was a very famous guitar maker named Danny Farrington. I don't know if you've ever
No, I
heard of
haven't.
him. Oh yeah, look him up. He's made guitars for George Harrison and
Oh, wow.
everybody.
Yeah, at some point, I'm self-taught. That's why I say I'm not a pro, because I've probably
Yeah.
plateaued at this point. But I still play all the time. But at some point, someone showed me this website called American Music Supply that lets you buy instruments with payment plans that are
Oh my
not
God.
credit based, and it's been very dangerous for me.
Oh
But I've been good.
God.
I've been good. I haven't bought any in a while. Thank you so
Awesome.
much for hanging out for a little bit.
Yes, no worries.
Yeah, I see your book right there.
Yes.
I have my copy right here.
Awesome.
Picked it up over the weekend from RJ Julia in Middletown.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I don't know if you were made aware. I am also Connecticut based, so this is
No,
yeah.
I don't
So
think
this
they told me
yeah.
that.
No, yeah, I don't know. So this is very cool for me that this book even exists.
Yeah, it's fun, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You can say these are all these and there there'll be at least 5 things I'm sure that I don't know, either didn't know about or hopefully but hopefully again it'll lead to a more serious recognition, I think, of Connecticut cinema. That was really the point of the book.
Yeah, no, and I think it will. I hope it will. Even as a lifelong Connecticut resident, there were lots of things I didn't know. I mean, I haven't read it fastidiously cover to cover, but I looked through it over the past couple of days, and I was like, oh, and I never knew that, or oh, I never even heard of that film, let alone knew it was shot or took place here. So yeah, it's been cool to sort of thumb through and see all the little gems that we don't maybe all know about.
I know. Or
Yeah.
you can go on a road trip and visit all the places.
Yeah, no, I know that's a good idea. Yeah, and as someone who has loved film since I was a teenager and stayed here for college, even though everyone who said I needed to go somewhere else to study film it was very pleasing to me when I saw that this book was coming out. So, and also, you say early in the book, whenever you were when you were young and whenever you heard about a movie that took place here or was shot here, it kind of like,
Yeah,
piqued your interest. So I've been that way too, and I've also been that way when I find out actors or singers or musicians that I like are from here.
yeah,
So I had known that you had grown up here.
yeah,
So it makes total sense to me that this book is from you, because it's like this love letter to this long history of cinema in this state.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
thanks. Yes, that was the point.
Yeah.
So, and I like,
Um
anyway, I hope people like it.
I hope people do too, and I hope people buy it. And support your local bookstores, please.
Oh,
Go to small
yeah.
bookstores.
Yeah, they're great. RJ Julia is awesome.
Yeah.
Think I'm doing an event with them. I'm going to be at the Kate November 15th and Mark
Hmm.
Twain House November 30th, and but I'm doing RJ Julia's in Madison, and then we're trying to figure out an event actually with Janine Basinger
Okay.
from Wesleyan, of course. So
Yeah.
that would be really amazing.
Yeah, that'd be cool, and that'd be much closer to me. I'd love to go to one of these, because these kinds of things don't come our way too often. So it's kind
I
of fun when
know.
they do.
Yeah.
Um, so I have a lot of questions. I was writing notes
Sure.
today, and I have a lot of questions about this book, and about
Okay.
some of the films in it.
Yeah.
Before we dive into that, I do want to quickly acknowledge the ongoing SAG strike,
Hmm.
because a lot of people who may listen to this will know you as an actor first, and a writer second. And so I have been given a little bit of guidance as to what that means for our talk, but can you like briefly run down for people listening kind of what the ground rules are here for our conversation?
Well, again, unfortunately, it just means I can't really, talk about my career or
Right.
promoting films that I'm in. In some instances, if people have a film out that they're promoting, they've received a waiver from
Hmm.
SAG, but just in support of my union, it's just better to not to do everything in support of the strike, and hopefully they will resolve it very soon. So that's
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, I hope so too. Was it just today
Yeah,
that we got the unfortunate news that the talks were abandoned again?
I don't know. It's
Uh,
it's
it's like every
just
day. It's like every day.
I know.
Hopefully it ends soon. I'm glad the screenwriters got some headway there, but yeah, the actors are still on the picket lines, so
I know.
it is what it is. All right, so this book, called, we haven't even said the name, Connecticut in the Movies,
Yes.
came out almost 10 days ago now. It's very fresh. So I'm curious then, and I read the intro, so I feel like I know a little bit of this, but I'm curious then, after so much time in the film industry, and this is your second book, I think,
Uh-huh.
correct?
My
Right?
second book.
Right.
My
So
first
what
was
was
I,
sort of the spark for you that made you go, okay, this is the book I need to write right now?
well, in the I write a little bit in the introduction. This idea that you mentioned before was always percolating in my head every time, if a character was from Connecticut or if the movie was set in Connecticut, it always seemed to connote something about the person, or it was a punchline, or it was evocative of something very bad happening to somebody. And for instance, Alfred Hitchcock in the movie Rope, as I used as an example in the introduction, even though the story was based on Leopold and Loeb and takes place in Chicago, he decided to move the story that they go to Yale, and they've killed their friend, and they're going to bury, they make a big deal, they say it a number of times, that they're going to go up to visit their mother who has a country house in Connecticut, and
Mm.
that's where they're going to bury the body. And every time he says, we're going to Connecticut for the weekend, it just says something which you don't quite know what it is, but as an audience member, you go, something really bad's going on in Connecticut. And because I grew up here, that idea always fascinated me. So then cut to I'm working for a site called Trailers from Hell, and I'm doing essays for them. And I did an essay on the movie The Swimmer. I was shocked that nobody had ever done an essay on them. So I did a very involved essay about The Swimmer, and people were just really, liked it quite a bit. And it involved my talking a little bit about my friendship with Frank Perry, who I knew when I worked for a film publicist named Peggy Siegel. And so then when COVID happened and everything, the whole world was kind of shut down, and I just felt like I was in free fall of, there had been a film script that I was working on and just about to get produced, and everything was suddenly like, everything's out the window, and you're left to your own devices. And I suddenly started to think, I'm going to write about that. I'm going to write about Connecticut movies. And at first I thought, well, maybe it'll just be a very long essay about some of the things that we're talking about, this idea of light and dark. And I just started out and I wrote an expanded version of The Swimmer, but it was sort of free form. I said, I think I'm just going to start writing about movies that are in Connecticut and see if there's a possible premise to put this all together in a book. And as the second film I worked on was Stanley and Iris. And that's when I really knew there was a book, because the film is not only about, the workers who worked in Waterbury, but it's about Waterbury for me. So much it's about the industrial, the how Waterbury was once, even though we still call it Brass City, I never really knew why it was called Brass City. It's like we name these, we say, it's the quiet little corner of Connecticut.
Yeah, I'm from Meriden, which is the Silver City, so it's the same idea.
Right. So we don't, and nobody ever thinks of Connecticut as having this really, really grand industrial past. And so as I got into Stanley and Iris, and in the film, they're working in a bakery, but in fact, it was a former button factory. And this button factory had been so famous that, they supplied all the buttons for the military. They supplied buttons that were in the film Gone with the Wind. And it was just this thriving, industrial town that was mentioned in the first few lines of Death of a Salesman. And that's when I knew I had a book, because I said, okay, Stanley and Iris is not only about Stanley and Iris, Robert De Niro. Robert De Niro, turns out, has made more films in Connecticut than any other actor. That's strange. I never knew that. Jane Fonda comes to Waterbury to do the film. She's picketed. She's protested. She's this, there was a big, if you go back and I go into detail in the book, the people from Waterbury at the time they tried to shut the film down.
Oh, wow.
They were not happy that Jane Fonda was in Waterbury, which led to her having some sit downs with veterans. That all happened. Then the director, Martin Ritt, who directed HUD, which was a film my grandfather was in, and he came out of the Actors Studio and the group theater. So you have all these different veins, I guess, but they all led back to Connecticut. And my thesis was, does it somehow have another layer because it's made in Connecticut? And did Jane Fonda's experiences in Waterbury permeate her performance in Stanley and Iris? And I would have to say that they did. So I found, though, that was my criteria for the films that I chose. It's not enough just to say, for me anyway, in this book, was okay, there's lots of movies and they say it's Connecticut, or they use the New Haven or something like that. But I wanted it to be something that really stood out and showcased a part of the state for everybody, just to say, here's this book, here's who we are, we need an identity. I feel like Boston has an identity, and Massachusetts has an identity, and New York has an identity, and Connecticut doesn't really have an identity. Part of that is it feels like it's by choice.
Mm.
Kind of like, leave us alone. We don't we don't want to be, we don't want anything to change, and don't bother us. But there has to be a reason that Eugene O'Neill and Arthur Miller and Lillian Hellman and Scott Fitzgerald and Calder, the famous sculptor, that all of these people have chosen to live and work in Connecticut. And I'm not even getting into the amazing amount of actors. And it's something beyond its proximity to New York City, because they could live in New Jersey or upstate New York, but they choose Connecticut. And I wanted to write about that. I was just kind of fascinated. And that was one of the great, things about having all of that time, is I had no editor to say, no one's interested in a book about Connecticut movies. It was something I wanted to do, to kind of write about, where I was from through these films. And then the weird part of it was finding myself like kind of missing Connecticut, and then ultimately deciding to move back here. That was not at all in the plan, but that's what happened.
So it kind of made you like re-fall in love with the state.
Yes, because as I was writing about, again, you have a thesis and you're writing about your through line. You're like, well, it is sort of odd, film after film after film, where, a sophisticated New Yorker comes to Connecticut. He's in touch with real people doing real things with real values, and decides that there's a better way to live, and a more, in the country, near nature. You get in touch with yourself. You find the person you really love. This happens again and again and again in these films in the 1930s, but it's still a trope that occurs in a modern film, which I like quite a bit, which is called The Family Stone, which is a sort of overlooked modern Christmas film. Terrific acting in it all the way around, but in this case, Sarah Jessica Parker plays a very jaded career gal, and she goes home for Christmas to meet Dermot Mulroney and his family. And the movie was shot in Greenwich, at a Victorian house in Greenwich, and being around real people and real folk, she discovers who she really is, and she changes, and it's transformational. And I found myself imagining that when I was writing in Los Angeles, like this fantasy of, can you really exist and have a career outside of Hollywood? And then I'm writing about Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward, and I'm like, well, they did it. And it's, look at Arthur Miller. He's going to his studio and and there was like fact after fact after fact of people really being able to have a great career, even though they lived in the country.
Yeah, and it does seem like historically it's been this sort of hidden secret, almost like this open secret, that like these Hollywood types and theater types can come to the country, which is really just an hour away. But it
Yeah.
feels so different, and it can feel so removed, and sometimes that's what people needed. But you're right, like why didn't they go to upstate New York? Why didn't they go to North Jersey? I don't know.
Yeah.
There's something about it.
Yes. And that's what I write about, that the difference between uh you know the suburbs of New York and Westchester are very, very different than the suburbs of Greenwich and Fairfield and Darien and Stamford. It's a completely different vibe, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, and you mentioned the film that takes place in Waterbury, but a lot of the films you mentioned do take place closer to the city, right? They take place, or they're filmed in Fairfield County, Litchfield County, along the border a little bit, maybe shoreline. I mean, obviously,
Mhm.
you mentioned Mystic Pizza, which we'll talk about in a few minutes,
Yeah.
but that's the other side of the shoreline. There's not a lot of cities, like, like gritty city life. And I do feel like as a Connecticut person that is kind of a misconception that we like don't have that.
Yeah.
But we have both ends of the spectrum. For some reason, so many of the stories, I think, tend toward the more countryside
Right.
aspect, the small town kind of feel.
Right. The idyllic. And
Hmm.
yet you get into a movie like Boomerang, which was based on a murder that happened in 1924 in Bridgeport, and unsolved murder to this day. It's unsolved. A
Hmm.
priest was killed. Nobody knows who killed him. There was tremendous pressure to find, the murderer, and the police pinned the murder on this soldier. They coerced a confession out of him. And then the local prosecutor, whose name was Homer Cummings, um, went to interview him. And there was a tremendous amount of pressure on him to convict the guy. And this is like this great Connecticut story that I never had heard about, where he stands up in court and gives this very famous speech in Connecticut versus Harold Israel, where he says it's just as important to protect the innocent as it is to convict the guilty, and basically switches sides and gets the
Hmm.
guy off. And then that's the whole basis of this movie. And
Hmm.
it took place in Bridgeport, and it talks about, dirty small town politics. And it was such a hot button issue that even in 1947, Bridgeport wouldn't let them shoot it there. They had to shoot the whole movie in Stamford.
Wow.
And so again, you have that is like, gritty film noir kind of, big city, small and mid-range city politics, that
Yeah.
you would see, just like a movie that you would see and expect with like Chicago. That's all happening here, but like you said, you just don't see many movies about it. And so the representation that we have in films is suburbia, dark suburbia,
Wealth, that kind of thing.
exactly, wealth, privilege.
Right.
There's that, but there's so much more. And again, that's what the book proves, is like, here's a look at the entire state.
Yeah. So you mentioned noir, you've mentioned a couple other films so far of different styles, and that was one of the things that I found most intriguing and most sort of involving about the book was the way you've sectioned the book off. It's almost each section has its own style or own sort of lens that this whatever assortment of films is looking through. So the first one that I wanted to touch on that caught my eye was the suburban sex comedy,
Yes.
which there are so many.
Yes.
But I found it interesting that they mostly seemingly, boomed in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
But what do you think it was about this kind of story that Connecticut felt like it made sense? Or like, does it say something about small town life that these stories take place here?
I mean, I went into it, I wouldn't have included, you know, first of all, no one has ever done a series, which I just thought would be interesting. Like, let's do a serious study of sex comedies. Paul Newman isn't, they're all, everybody, they did so many of them, and they
Yeah.
all take place in Connecticut. And so, in my theory, that what I write about is that in the film Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House, this concept of moving to Connecticut really worked, and people moved here. But then there becomes this kind of period of adjustment where we're in Connecticut. There's no bars around. Like, you don't go to the corner bar. There's
Mhm.
not a lot to do. And this idea of cocktail parties, drinking, wife swapping, it starts to appear in these films. And the other thing that I thought was sort of strange about them is that all the men are now commuting. So like in Mr. Blandings, his family is involved in this whole decision, and they move to the country, and the kids are very present in the film. Once you get to the sex comedies, the kids are like props or they're shoved off to the side. There's a movie called, which is one of my favorites. It's wall to wall, like drinking and smoking, is where Shelley Winters, Janet Leigh in the film, she's a dentist who gives up her career for her husband, Van Johnson, so he can become a writer. And they move to Connecticut so that he can write, but he gets an apartment in New York City so he can, hang out and have an affair with his publisher. So he's going back and forth, and she's the neglected housewife now stuck in Connecticut, and Shelley Winters comes over with her gay best friend who happens to be an interior decorator, code for he's gay.
Right.
And she gives her tips on, you're going to have to become like a great party giver. And there's a very long scene where she tells her it's really important to have vodka because in Connecticut, people only drink vodka. And I'm watching these movies and I'm going, okay, is this because people, it is this well-heeled playground off from New York? Or is it because these successful writers, one of them is J. Preston Allen, is it because they really were living in Connecticut and these things were really going on?
Yeah.
It's kind of, half and half, but I don't know. But suddenly the women specifically really shift from Myrna Loy and Blandings, where she's directly involved in the plot. Now you almost have two separate plots where, there's another like horrendous movie called The Tunnel of Love, where Doris Day, somehow they can't have children. We never really figure out why. They're talking about adopting, but then Richard Widmark makes a drunken pass at the adoption agency woman, that Doris Day gets mad, but somehow he ends up spending the night with the woman.
It sounds like a screwball comedy.
Yeah. And then the woman comes back and she has a child and wants them to have the child. It's like, it's just, and Doris Day thinks Richard Widmark fathered the child. If you take away the idea of that it's a sex comedy, it's like, okay, these plots are insane. Like they're completely, people are drinking, spending the night in hotels, and but I found it to be fascinating because they're breaking down all these sort of social mores,
Mm-hmm.
and The Tunnel of Love was directed by Gene Kelly, who also directed, I don't know if you've ever seen the absolutely horrendous but fun Guide for the Married Man.
No, I haven't.
Oh my God. That was the early 60s. But and then you have this other thing with Richard Widmark, who actually was living in Connecticut too. And so I found it all to be kind of fascinating because he, in the movie, his character moves to Connecticut he wants to be an artist. There's always something like they leave their advertising agency, to become an artist, or he's here in Connecticut to be a writer. And yet you have these real instances again and again and again where you do have these writers living in Connecticut. So I am never really sure,
Yeah.
but I found it fascinating, and they just get worse and worse and worse. And until you get to, the guy, the Secret Life of an American Wife, where she has an affair to spice up her marriage. And I'm like, oh, okay, so there's no veneer anymore.
Right.
And then they kind of fade away.
Yeah, that's interesting too. That idea of like, well, which came first? Are they displaying these mores just because that's how it was, or are these films trying to comment on these mores or challenge these mores a little bit? And I guess it can be hard to tell now in retrospect because we don't know what was going on necessarily at the time. But then you do have films like Secret Life of an American Wife that are so bluntly about what they're about, and it feels like there's no questioning it. This is supposed to be like revealing something, some truth about the
Yeah.
state of things, what's going on. And that was my other note I had for that section too, is like this idea of stereotyping and how there is kind of this Connecticut cliche of the well-to-do, wealthy family, tons of liquor, always a
Mhm.
martini in hand, like that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
I don't know if that's died away or if it just became a punchline again. I'm not really sure what happened, but it was so prevalent in the 50s and 60s films.
I think it morphed into films like Thoroughbreds, which is again a really terrific. I
Hmm.
put it in. I didn't even want to put it as a horror movie because I put it in what I call dark suburbia redux.
Yeah.
Again, just this kind of arty way of looking at suburbia, but absolutely terrific
Hmm.
film about the well-heeled, and it's morphed into what was the sex comedy is now just dark suburbia, or another film, something about Kevin. Again, you have sort of wealthy people just doing horrible things to each to
Yeah.
each other now, or horrible things happening.
Yeah. So yeah, you mentioned the dark suburbia. That was the other section, but the first dark suburbia I wanted to touch on because that was where The Swimmer comes up.
Yes.
The Burt Lancaster film The Swimmer. You cite it in the book as the best example of this subgenre, and I'm just curious, how does that film kind of illuminate for us what you mean by dark suburbia? How does that best fit that one?
I think it goes back to the original source, that it's written by John Cheever. I don't think you can't think of Connecticut without thinking of John Cheever, and some of the things that he has written about in the one aspect of Connecticut, which is that, feeling of not belonging, of somehow, no matter what you do, did you have to come over on the Mayflower? I don't know. There's always a feeling that even though you do the right things, that you're not in the right you're not, accepted in the garden club, or you're
Mm,
not in high school, you're not in the right group, or your parents didn't do the kind of right. I had a kind of a hippie childhood, so again, still is in Connecticut a very much standard of what is the way you're supposed to live and hold yourself, and those
hmm.
kind of things are very. You're not supposed to be a show off. You're not supposed to do anything sort of too showy. So there's those puritanical elements, um, that I think Cheever captured, so incredibly in all of his books. So then what I love about the film is that to me, it is the complete deconstruction of suburbia, which is a man's everything that we thought we wanted, which was a nice house in the country and upward mobility, has destroyed him. So when we meet him, he's a nowhere man. Why is he a nowhere man? I mean, we can assume he was probably in advertising, so all these things that we were laughing about before, sex comedies, and now it's just like, this is without any humor at all. This is like this man who is kind of lost, everything, and as he goes in each pool and swims the length of the pool, it's like each episode, when he comes out, he hopes that somehow this is all a dream.
Right.
It's not. And I just think it's such an incredible film from the very opening of the movie, where you see this deer, and you can't think of Connecticut without thinking of, there's just deer everywhere, and this deer is looking at something, we don't know what it's looking at, and then this man comes out of the woods, and he's wearing a bathing suit, and he crosses the Merritt Parkway, and it's just this weird jumble of images that I'm like, yeah, that's Connecticut. It's idyllic in nature, but then very strange things happen, and it's like this little enclave onto itself that's very kind of hard to describe. And I think the movie just nails it. And I think Burt Lancaster also, because it's a deconstruction of his own persona as a movie star. And the fact that, like I was saying with Jane Fonda, he was 50 years old when he made the movie. I think he was going through a divorce. He desperately wanted to play this part. Why
Mm.
did he want to play this part? I found that interesting. Spends the whole movie like wearing a bathing suit, like walking around. It just must have been such a strange, and then so many of the places where they shot these houses, and I went back to look at some of the houses, and I found a real estate advertisement where the part of the selling of the house was Burt Lancaster, swam in this pool, and they used this house in the swimmer as if that was a good thing. Like, it's the darkest. It's like, why? Do you remember that the swimmer was like about the most depressing? That the house in suburbia is what killed him. Uh, but to me, it's about, and I wonder, I would like to get your opinion on this. Does Connecticut sometimes have misplaced values?
Oh, I'm sure it does. What do you mean specifically?
The money, wealth,
Yeah,
going to an Ivy League school, whether you went to Yale or not,
right.
it
No, yeah,
there are these things that are still in place in the way that they, does it tie back to England? I don't know, but
yeah. No, I'm sure we do, and there is a certain fascination with those kinds of things, I think, around here, especially probably in the more upper class families and upper class
Mhm.
households. I think that sort of that tethering to how things used to be or how what we used to want maybe is still really prevalent. I'm not entirely sure. We are, of course, we do have Yale. We have one of the most famous Ivy League schools. We have Wesleyan. We have other great colleges. We're kind of known for that. And so there is sort of a pressure maybe built in to that.
Mhm.
Um, and then what that even means, that identity of what that means to then go to one of those colleges and to be from one of those colleges and to be from that layer of society that must still be a point of fascination for some folks around here.
Yeah, the and Wesleyan is interesting because again, it's in this very industrial town of Middletown, and yet Wesleyan seems somewhat, it's like isolated within itself, and it doesn't really associate
Yeah.
much with Middletown.
No,
And
it's its own little town. The campus is kind of its own little town.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that's sort of fascinating. But the beginning of the movie, he's he's talking to someone and they're talking about, they're hungover and there was a big party last night, and they're talking about going to another party, and then he mentions these people called the Biswangers. Now, are the Biswangers, are they Jewish? We don't, it seems maybe they've got a weird name, and the woman says, those awful people, the Bisway, she keeps saying, now that's directly from the Cheever, short
Okay.
story. She goes, those Biswangers, those awful people who live on Redcoat Road. Now I just if we live in Connecticut, we pass roads and we just know what that means. Now, why do we know what that means?
Yeah.
We differentiate people by the road that they live on and say,
Yeah.
oh, he lives on. And if a certain road means new money, a certain, versus old money.
For sure.
And I was trying to, and that's why I think the book is so important in explaining again and not shying away from the dark aspects of Connecticut, but saying, but this is what makes it a fascinating state to me,
Yeah.
because I could just write about it, forever and ever.
Yeah. And I mean, that's where we get films like Stepford Wives, that sort of heightening of something that really was real, this desperate seeking of identity and of place. And yes, it's a very heightened, almost horror style film, but like it's getting at something that probably was a real phenomenon and kind of still is probably to some degree. Because you're right. I mean, I don't know if it's biased because we live in a small state, but you're right. We all know what that means. And we've all done that at least as children. We've probably grown up knowing certain things or thinking we know certain things about different areas or different towns or streets. It's very strange.
Yeah.
It's very strange.
And it's, and it's still here.
Hmm.
And so it's something that I just wanted to write about and cover. And I just there, when you're in Guilford, and I wrote about making a movie in Guilford, and I love Guilford, but Guilford is also an enclave for a lot of New Yorkers. And so the people within Guilford are like, oh, there's New York license plates. And, that's
Hmm.
something my mom is like, look at all these New York license plates, New Yorkers coming in here and changing what we want to do. And
Yeah.
so I don't know. It's always that balance. But it's an incredible. First of all, it's just an incredible movie, and Frank Perry is a great kind of almost overlooked filmmaker, I think.
Hmm. All right. So let's talk about Mystic Pizza.
Yeah, let's.
So, Mystic Pizza, as you say in the book, although I think anyone from Connecticut probably already knows this, that it really probably is the best known Connecticut film. It was a hit. It was sort of an indie film that became pretty big. And I mean, as you say in the book, as you sort of quip in the book, it says has the town right in the name. I mean, like if you don't, if you have no idea that that town exists and you just think it's about like mythical pizza, you're going to look that up and you're going to find out it's a town, and it's like inevitable that we're going to all connect this to Connecticut.
Yeah,
Um, do you think it's a fitting film to be like our emblematic film?
I mean, in some ways, I do, because it's a little bit closer to where I grew up.
Hmm.
And again, I don't think Connecticut is ever known for its fishermen or Portuguese people, or
Right.
even Mystic Seaport. People maybe know Mystic Seaport, but they don't know that how important ships and shipping and fishermen and captains were. Again, this is a whole part of Connecticut and nobody even thinks about. And so when I was a kid and the movie came out, I was just excited to have a movie that was more about the areas that I knew, New London and Old Saybrook, Essex, that part of Connecticut.
Yeah.
Um, and it was the first movie that I saw that actually used the word townies. Now people don't say that anymore, but that was something that people used to say, you
Hmm.
know, townies. And I was like, yeah, they got, and Amy Holden Jones, who wrote the script, she had wanted to direct it, but they wouldn't let her direct it. She lived in Mystic, and the whole writing of the movie was somewhat accidental. As I write in the book, it came about because she and her husband were on their way to Maine, and they were looking for a good place to get fried clams, and they heard about a
Hmm.
place in Mystic, and they stopped, and she saw this sign, Mystic Pizza, and said, oh, that would be a good title for a movie, and then wrote the movie, and then ended up, just like I write again and again, ended up moving to Mystic and living in Mystic. So that's why I think the film has so much in it that is very truthful. We don't. I mean, I wrote about it in a way. I said, we don't talk about movies like feel good movies anymore. It's sort of gone out of fashion. But this was a feel good movie, like a coming of age of these three girls. One's going to go to Yale,
Yeah, there you
and
go.
one, you know, and because she's smart, and one is using her looks, and one's going to work in a pizza parlor, and yet they're all friends. And I think it is very, very reflective of Connecticut that we have friendships here. I mean, I don't know about you, but there's people that I know, from when I was a kid doing theater, and we still are friends and we know each other because, maybe because it's a small state. But I thought it captured a lot of parts of Connecticut that had not been, covered before.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you think that that sort of friendship and the strength of that friendship that comes through in the writing, do you think that's kind of what helped take this movie off? Because there were other Connecticut films with huge stars, and yet it took until this film for there to be a landmark Connecticut movie, and it made a lot of money. It did really well, and it's still well liked. It's still well thought of. I mean, is that sort of maybe why it worked? Because it's a small story, takes place in a small town. It's one of those movies where not a ton happens, but it's about
yeah,
what's actually happening. But it really took off.
I think it just really, I mean, there's a scene that to me just really resonated, that this is like my childhood, when they go, they have a local place where they are playing pool and drinking with their crowd, which is very blue collar.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rich kids, the rich preppy kids come in, and he sort of spots Julia Roberts, but his friend, his girl who's with him, is like, how could you even look at that girl, that townie, that low class townie? And it says right out in front that there's like this class system, going on. And there's scenes of Julia Roberts where, she's not smart enough to go to Yale, and she's looking outside the restaurant at him inside the restaurant. She thinks he's on a date with someone. But I think it did capture a part of Connecticut that I certainly related to, was that feeling of, if I don't have the money to go to Yale and I don't come from a good family, like what are my options here? What
Right.
am I going to do? And I think that that's something that nobody ever really talks about again in Connecticut, and I think is a genuine issue, and an issue to this day.
I mean,
That
I'm a high school teacher, so I see it. I see it a lot.
yeah, it's not like, when it's not like we're, and again, the book is this blueprint to say you can be an artist, you can be a writer. Look at all these great people that came out of Connecticut, but it's so much like, you need to go to vocational school and you need to go to Yale. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think that Mystic Pizza definitely, it seems simplistic, but I just think they nailed a kind of a teenage, right before you go to college experience. And I think that that's why you don't see too many female bonding movies like
Yeah.
that, where all the girls they support each other, they're working together. The owner of the pizza place is a woman, and obviously it's flawed movie, but it still held up. I hadn't seen it in years, and it was so much fun again to revisit these films and see that, wow, this is a genuine, kind of origin of really a true Connecticut film.
Yeah. I do. I want to shout out, not that she'll ever listen, but I do want to shout out quickly because I know everyone thinks of this as Julia Roberts as like right before she got famous movie, and she's
Yeah.
lovely in it. And I love Lily Taylor in everything, including 6 Feet Under, which you pop up in at one point, and that's like my
Yes.
favorite show of all time.
Yeah.
But I want to shout out Annabeth Gish because whenever I watch this movie, her
Oh, she's
performance,
so good.
it's beautiful. It's like this is the kind of thing where I'll watch it now, and obviously I watch it years removed from when it first came out, but I'm like, why not? Why didn't her star just take off? Because her performance in that film is so subtle and so heartbreaking and so moving. I just think it's like
I agree.
a wonderful piece of acting. I'm always sort of in awe of her in that film. She does so much with so little in her face and in her voice. It's so good.
Yeah, and it's really her story. I mean, even though it's about the three girls,
Yeah.
it's really her story. And again, when she's riding her scooter, around Mystic, you really believe that she grew up in this town
Mm-hmm.
and that she knows this town, and she's a bit of a survivor. She's the one who's had to, you feel like she worked really hard to get into Yale, and her the affair that she ends up having, she becomes she's the guy's nanny, right, or
Mm-hmm.
babysitter. And then he's married, and he sort of leads her on, and they have this affair, and it's very kind of mature. I had never seen anything like that in a movie, where that was handled in a way that wasn't like so provocative. It was weird, and it still holds up to this day. When I watched it again, I thought, that's an experience that people really do have.
Yeah.
Um, Reminiscent again of it just reminded me of a lot of experiences I had when I was younger.
Yeah. So the last genre I want to touch on is the dark suburbia redux.
Yes.
It might be recency bias because I was born in 1993, but these are the types of films that I was more familiar with. These are the ones that I've seen. Some of them I love, like The Ice Storm, which is just gorgeous. Revolutionary Road, which is so depressing and so sad.
Yeah, oh my
And
God.
then it's so sad. And then Rachel Getting Married, which is one of my all-time favorite films, full of some of my favorite performances. Um, but all three of these films and several others that you mentioned do kind of posit Connecticut in the late 20th and then 21st century as this suffocating place
Mhm.
of just like imminent doom. Nothing good is going to come of anything here.
Right.
People
Right.
die in almost all these movies. And I'm just like wondering, why do you think it's this place even now, even today, where, because you also mentioned Land of Steady Habits, which came out only 3 years ago or 4 years ago. Thoroughbreds was recent too. Why is it this place still that people feel is a good location or home to this kind of mentality? Why are there no happy Connecticut movies anymore?
It's just, except for, like I said, now it's like it's either Hallmark and
Yeah.
or if a filmmaker, that's what I write. If a
Yeah.
filmmaker wants to connote emptiness, something really bad is going to happen to these people, you send them right to Connecticut, and we know it's going to be something awful is going to happen.
It's so weird.
Um, but my theory is that it begins with the Stepford Wives, that it starts, that's the through line I try to tell in the book, is the swimmer starts to deconstruct things. There's another movie called Loving, that very, very dark film. Um, and then you get the Stepford Wives, and the Stepford Wives is just like, the opening scene where he takes his wife. He's in she's looking out I describe it as like she's looking out the window like a dog being brought to a kill shelter. We know something really horrible is going to happen to her, and it happens in Connecticut. And also the way that the film was shot, it then created, it's almost like when people do old movies and they give it a weird orange tint, like we're in old timey now, so let's give everything in a little strange orange tint. Now when we are in suburbia of the past, everything is sumptuous production values. Lots of every film has somebody looking through a gigantic picture window with the woods reflected on them. So it's like it's this, it's this prison. People talk slower. Like in Revolutionary Road, the soundtrack is like this booming. It's beautiful, but it's very dark. Everybody talks suddenly very slowly. Unlike the movies of the actual period, like Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, that are very visceral. Nobody is, and there's not this, overly painted, I guess, sort of quality to all the films. Now, that's not to say I don't love them, and they're all, really great, but they're almost like art installations, almost beyond, you know, beyond the aside from the film. They're all elegantly production designed. Everybody's wearing very mod clothing. They live in really groovy houses, and but really bad things are happening. I mean, as I said, my theory is it goes with the Stepford wives, and I don't think we have not. And part of the reason of the book was to say, like, okay, we've come to the end of the road of this. We're so much more. Like, we need to go back to Stanley and Iris and Mystic Pizza and a lot of these other movies. It's like, it's not just this one little corner of Connecticut, because they're talking about America, but they're using Connecticut,
Right.
and it's a little jarring. It's like, it's not that bad here, is it?
I do think people who aren't from here, or at least maybe who don't still live here, do think it's that bad. And so it's up to people like us to be like, no, I promise it's not that bad. It's
I
really,
know,
really
I know.
not. I think Connecticut gets a pretty bad rap sometimes. So, it's not that
Oh,
bad, guys. It's not that bad.
yeah. I mean, well, that's what all the other movies
Right.
are for. And in fact, one of the films I talk about, Revolutionary Road, they watched the ice storm and they realized they had an identical scene of uh the wife in both cases. In Ice Storm, there's a scene with the lead actress where the husband brings her home and they end up having sex in their car,
Hmm.
and then the same scene happens in Revolutionary Road. Literally the exact same scene. It was the same. A husband takes her home and she has, sex with the neighbor, and
Mm-hmm.
they realized to their horror it was actually, so they had to go back and restage the scene to
Hmm.
make it different than the ice storm. So again, we're talking about filmmakers' perceptions. Like, do they think that every housewife in Connecticut is really unhappy and don't take her home because you'll end up having sex with her in the car? I don't know. But we believe it, and the idea of the book is, why do we believe it? Are there elements of this that are true, or is it a metaphor, you know, um, for your unhappiness, and we'll believe it more if it's Connecticut, in the same way that Alfred Hitchcock thought, let's make them go, two rich kids that went to Yale, as opposed to being from Chicago. Like,
Yeah.
why was it more sinister to make them be from Connecticut than from Chicago? But it works somehow.
Yeah. It's an intriguing thing to unpack, and it's like an endless road you could go down with that kind of thing.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
okay, so to wrap up, I jotted down some rapid fire Connecticut questions for you. Um, First of all, you're like, oh no.
I know. Hope I can.
um,
Don't ask me why it's called Nutmeg State, because
no,
I
no,
don't
not
know.
a bat, not that kind of question.
Okay.
I couldn't answer that either. Don't worry. What is your favorite coffee shop here?
Wow, that is tough. I feel like I'm going to insult somebody if I'm just
What's one of your favorites? Put it that way.
I really love Chester. Well, because I ride bikes, and the Simon's Marketplace down in Chester
Mm,
is pretty awesome. But I
I love Chester. I used to work in a school in Chester.
yeah, I mean, Chester is great. Essex has some great towns. I love, Middletown has Clicola, so
Oh, geez. I had forgot about this question. You thought you were gonna piss people off with your coffee question. I was gonna ask what your
uh-oh.
favorite pizza is.
Oh, pizza.
That's probably not a fair question, but I
No.
have my answer, and I don't care. I don't care what people
Are you
say.
are you going with Pepe's, or
I'm not. I'm
okay,
not going with Pepe's.
you're
Like,
going
okay, so for me, may, may, maybe it's because I'm maybe it's because I'm 30 years old. I don't know, but I go with Bar in New Haven.
Okay, I don't know them.
I like their pizza
Good.
a
Okay.
lot. And if I'm not
Right.
talking New Haven, Mondo
Right.
Pizza in Middletown,
It's
I
pretty
love.
good. Yeah,
I love
it's pretty good.
Mondo.
Yeah, they're
Um,
nice.
but
What
I don't
about
go with Pepe's.
Otto's in Chester?
I don't know Otto's.
Oh, okay. So they do, fire, what is it? Wood,
Yeah.
fire, burnt. Yeah, they're pretty good.
Okay.
Um, what about, let me see, what else? What about seafood? Like fried seafood? There's
Yeah,
only
see,
one for
I
me.
know that's not like my game. That's not my bag.
I got it. To me the fried clams at Lenny and Joe's in Westbrook is my absolute favorite.
That's good
But
to know.
you cannot get a bad seafood meal in Niantic.
I love Niantic.
Niantic is just, I love it. Again, that's, you only have to live here to know that Niantic is a great, great food town, and they've got good pizza too.
Yeah. They also have a lovely bookstore, the Book Barn. But
Oh, so I'll have to go.
oh
I'm
yeah,
gonna
it's
be
fun.
going every. I'll be going to every bookstore.
Yeah,
I,
right.
s- I I stopped in. I had a couple friends and we drove to Westport, and I said I'm gonna go in the Barnes and Noble, just to see if they have my book. And they only had one copy left. I was so excited.
That's fun.
Yeah, so I signed it.
Let's see. Any thoughts on Gilmore Girls?
Ah,
Speaking of
that's
CTTV,
that's funny because I actually know one of the writers of Gilmore Girls.
hmm,
I was not, again, on the Girls bandwagon because I didn't necessarily know that they were from Connecticut. But recently, once I found out my friend had written in it, I'm pro Gilmore Girls. Do you think
okay.
they got it right? I mean, they made it in Hollywood. I don't think it's
Yeah.
necessarily so accurate.
No, there are things that are accurate and there are things that are wildly inaccurate. Like
Yeah.
my husband and I watch it, we've watched it a few times because we just it's like comfort viewing. And they'll say something we're like, that's not right. That's not right at all. Like distances between places are always way off. They hate New Haven. They're so mean about New Haven on that show. I don't know why. Um, but they get some of it right. I think they get sort of small town Connecticut
Yeah.
whimsy a little bit right. They get private school, public school sort of classism, I think, right.
Yeah.
So they do get some right. I think they did some good research, but there's always some things that were like, I don't know.
The well, New Haven, there's a Steven Soderbergh film. I'm blanking on which one it was, but it's George Clooney. Is it Michael Clayton maybe?
Oh,
Where well, this was one of those things like Brad Pitt says to him, "How do you like living in East Haven?" And he goes, "It's shitty." Like I said, okay, what, like, how
yeah.
did they get away? So that's like an example of like, I'm in the movie theater going, what?
Yeah,
And
huh?
Connecticut also pops up in the movie Jaws,
Oh, does it?
where, yes, it's like in the very beginning of the movie, I think it's after the girl has been found dead on the
Okay.
beach, right? So it's like, and Roy Scheider is interviewing the kid, and he says something to the effect of, I'm from I'm from Hartford. I go to Trinity. And it's just like, again, I was like, what? That's such an inside little,
Yeah.
but the writer is Peter Benchley. Now, I don't know, maybe he must have it is
Yeah.
so inside,
Yeah.
but in the way that I have snuck in many, many times in movies, Connecticut. There's a scene in Cape Fear after I've been beaten up and I'm in the hospital, and Nick Nolte says something to me like, what will you do now? And I said, I'm going to go home to Connecticut. So I always throw it in there.
That's funny.
It's like a little in joke.
Yeah. All right, last one. What is one or two movies that you just were not able to work into the book?
It's so sad. Well, definitely Beetlejuice. There's a whole,
That
I
was
mean,
my number one.
oh, it was
Yeah.
because it's so hard that I didn't you go down this path of, okay, well, if I put in Beetlejuice, then why didn't I put in Sleepers? Or why, you know, or a movie where they shot the interiors in the film, and I finally had this compromise where I wrote a chapter called Connecticut Cameos, because I thought, well, how did they use the film in a sort of a clever way? So like in All About Eve, we know they're in Connecticut and we see like one little shot of New Haven, but then they're in, rear screen projection, and we see there, but the whole major scene in the movie takes place at the Taft Hotel.
Yeah.
And what's strange about the Taft Hotel is it's so accurate, because that is where the actors would have stayed, in the 40s when they were doing these out of town tryouts. So that makes it like a Connecticut cameo, or, Indiana Jones, Crystal Skull. I was like, I'm going to get hammered, if I don't put this movie in. He's like, they sort of used New Haven, but I almost was like, not going to include it. And it's the same thing. I said, well, it starts to become a different book if I'm just going to list, a movie just like Michael Clayton, because he says East Haven. Is that a Connecticut movie? And so as I was, and there was a few movies that didn't make the book, and I felt really bad just because I didn't think they were very good movies. And so I just thought, do you include a movie that is not very good just to say, here's another Connecticut movie?
Yeah.
And I wanted it to, kind of tell a story. And so there were certain films that, that I just decided I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna put in. They didn't fit in my own, kind of criteria for what I think, but certainly I welcome other people. They can do a sequel and do all the ones I missed.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Illeana,
you
for speaking with me about everything Connecticut in the movies, or everything we could fit into to just over an hour. I hope people check out the book. It's called Connecticut in the Movies. You can find it in your bookstores or online. It is about that very topic, but also so much more. Thank you very much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. I had fun.
Oh, thank you. Me too. And hopefully I'll see you at RJ Julia's or one of these.
I would like to go to one of the events. I'll find one I can go to. I know a few years ago you were the oh, that was my dog. I know a few years ago you were the Grand Marshal at the Middletown Pride, and that was like the one year I couldn't go.
That was the first year.
Yeah, I have gone since then, and it is fun. It's a fun event.
My friend got me involved, and it was nothing was planned, and they I was a nervous wreck. They were like, "You're going to be introducing the governor." There was like a drag queen. I was like, "Wait a minute, I don't know anybody's name. Can you write these names down?" Talk about doing something on the fly, but it was fun. It was fun to do. Got to do more of that in Connecticut, and
Oh yeah, for sure.
My friend and I are always talking about there needs to be more of like a cabaret type place on Main Street.
I would love that.
I know. I'm trying to force him into it. I could only. I said I'll do stuff part time if you guys do the heavy lifting, But anyway.
Well, anyway, yeah. If you're in state, check out Illeana's website. There are some speaking engagements about the book coming up, and there will probably be more to come. And yeah, check out the book. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. The last thing I was going to say is, yes, they can look on I have a Facebook page, Connecticut in the Movies, and all of my events are listed up there, including the Kate and November 15th. I'll be there with Colin McEnroe. So that'll be a lot of fun. Yeah,
that'll be fun. Cool.
Yeah.
You get it
fun. So for the ticket, you get a free book. So come on, Christmas is coming.
That's a good deal.
Yeah, better than Jimmy Webb. He's not giving anything away, for God's sakes. Anyway, all right, great. On that note, okay, great talking to you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. So long.
Bye-bye.